In the early morning hours of November 13, 2022, the city of Moscow, Idaho was asleep. The streets around the University of Idaho were quiet. Students were returning from parties, bars, and weekend gatherings. It was the kind of night that had happened hundreds of times before, in a town known more for college life than violent crime.
At a rental home located at 1122 King Road, 4 University of Idaho students had returned home after a night out. Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin were all young, all connected through friendships and campus life, and all expecting to wake up the next morning.
They never would. By the end of that night, all 4 had been killed inside the residence. What happened during those hours would become one of the most closely followed criminal investigations in modern America. And almost immediately, the case raised a disturbing question. How could 4 students be killed inside a house near a university campus, and yet no suspect be publicly identified for weeks?
To understand the mystery, it helps to understand the setting. Moscow is a small city in northern Idaho. For decades, it had maintained a reputation as a relatively safe college town. The University of Idaho was the center of community life. Students came from across the region to study, socialize, and build their futures. The King Road residence sat in a neighborhood familiar to many students. The house had become a gathering place where friends often visited. Nothing about it appeared unusual.
On the evening of November 12th, the victims spent their time doing what thousands of college students do every weekend. Publicly available information later showed that Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen spent part of the evening in downtown Moscow. Xana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin attended a social event before returning home. As the night progressed, each of them eventually made their way back to the King Road residence. At the time, there was no public indication that anything dangerous was about to happen. No public warning, no known threat, no sign that the house had become the center of a tragedy still discussed years later. Then the timeline enters a period filled with unanswered questions. Investigators later outlined a sequence of events supported by surveillance footage, digital evidence, witness accounts, and forensic analysis. But many moments inside the residence remain known only through evidence presented by investigators and information revealed through court proceedings. The uncertainty surrounding those moments became one of the most haunting elements of the entire case.
What exactly happened inside the house? How long did the events unfold? And why were these particular victims targeted? Hours later, the outside world still did not know what had occurred. Friends attempted to contact the occupants of the house. Messages were sent. Calls were made. Life outside continued as normal. Eventually, a 911 call brought law enforcement to the residence. The Moscow Police Department arrived and discovered a scene unlike anything the city had experienced in recent memory. Inside were the bodies of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin.
The investigation immediately became a major priority. As news spread throughout Moscow and beyond, shock turned into fear. Students wondered whether a dangerous individual remained at large. Parents questioned whether their children were safe. National media outlets quickly focused attention on the case. Yet, despite the intense public interest, investigators revealed very little during the early stages. This created a vacuum. And whenever a vacuum exists in a high-profile case, speculation rushes in to fill it. Online communities began examining every available detail. Photographs were analyzed.
Videos were reviewed. Timelines were debated. Theories multiplied. Some were reasonable. Many were not. But underneath all the speculation remained a central mystery. Who committed the murders? The scale of the investigation grew rapidly. The Moscow Police Department received assistance from the Idaho State Police and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Hundreds of interviews were conducted. Thousands of tips were reviewed. Investigators gathered digital records, surveillance footage, and forensic evidence. The case had become one of the largest criminal investigations in Idaho history. Yet for the public, progress appeared frustratingly slow. Days passed, then weeks. No arrest was announced. No suspect was publicly identified. And one particular statement from authorities generated significant discussion. Officials stated that they believed there was no ongoing threat to the community. For some observers, that statement seemed difficult to understand.
How could investigators reassure the public when no suspect had been identified? Did authorities know more than they were revealing? Or was the statement based on evidence not yet available to the public? The contradiction fueled even more curiosity. As investigators worked behind the scenes, another important piece of the story was developing. Surveillance footage collected from multiple locations revealed the repeated presence of a white Hyundai Elantra in the area around the time of the killings. Authorities eventually announced they were seeking information about the vehicle. The request immediately captured public attention. The white Hyundai Elantra became one of the most discussed clues in the entire case. Across the country, people began searching for similar vehicles. News reports highlighted the development. Social media users shared images and theories. But investigators still remained silent about many crucial details.
Why was the vehicle important? Who was driving it? And what connection, if any, did it have to the murders? Meanwhile, forensic investigators continued examining evidence recovered from the crime scene. Among the most significant pieces of evidence discussed in later court filings was DNA reportedly found on a knife sheath recovered at the residence. At the time, however, the public knew little about what investigators had discovered. The investigation moved forward largely out of sight. What looked like silence from the outside was actually an enormous effort involving multiple agencies and countless hours of investigative work. As November turned into December, the pressure continued to grow. Families wanted answers. Students wanted answers. The nation wanted answers. Then, slowly, pieces of the puzzle began connecting. Investigators reportedly examined vehicle registration records. They analyzed surveillance footage. They reviewed phone data. They followed leads extending beyond Idaho. The focus of the investigation began moving toward a man named Bryan Kohberger. Unlike the victims, Bryan Kohberger was not a student at the University of Idaho. He was a graduate student studying criminology at Washington State University in Pullman, Washington.
The distance between Pullman and Moscow is relatively short. For investigators, that geographical connection became one of many factors examined during the case. As law enforcement continued gathering information, surveillance efforts reportedly expanded. According to public reporting and court documents, investigators monitored movements connected to the developing case. The investigation was no longer centered only in Moscow. It had become a multi-state operation. Yet the public still knew almost nothing about where the investigation was heading. Then came a dramatic development. In late December 2022, Bryan Kohberger was arrested in Pennsylvania. The announcement stunned many observers. For weeks, theories had circulated across the internet. Numerous names had been discussed, many assumptions had been made. But few outside law enforcement had publicly identified Bryan Kohberger as a likely suspect. The arrest immediately changed the narrative. For the first time, investigators appeared to have a person they believed was responsible. But the arrest did not end the mystery. In many ways, it expanded it. Who was Bryan Kohberger? What evidence connected him to the crime? And perhaps most importantly, why would he allegedly commit such an act?
Soon after the arrest, court documents revealed portions of the investigative narrative.
Among the evidence described were surveillance footage, cell phone records, and DNA analysis. Investigators alleged that a knife sheath recovered at the scene contained DNA linking Bryan Kohberger to the evidence. Authorities also outlined information regarding cell phone activity and vehicle movements. For many observers, the emerging picture seemed powerful. Yet, legal proceedings are not determined by public opinion. They are determined through the judicial process. And as the case moved through the courts, another layer of complexity emerged. The defense challenged aspects of the evidence and investigative conclusions. Questions were raised regarding interpretations, procedures, and the strength of various claims. This is not unusual in major criminal cases, but it reinforced an important reality. An arrest is not the same as a conviction. An allegation is not the same as proof. The legal process exists specifically to examine evidence and determine facts. As proceedings continued, public fascination with the case only intensified. The victims remained at the center of the story. Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin. Their photographs appeared across news broadcasts and documentaries.
Friends and family members remembered them as young people with futures ahead of them. Their loss became the emotional foundation beneath every discussion about evidence, timelines, and investigative strategy. Because beyond every theory and every court filing was a simple fact. 4 lives had ended, and an entire community had been permanently changed. Yet even as investigators presented evidence, some questions remained difficult to answer. One of the most discussed was motive. Public court records and reporting revealed many details about the investigation, but understanding why such an event occurred remained far more challenging. Human behavior is often complex. Violent crimes can sometimes leave behind clear motives. In other cases, motivations remain unclear even after years of investigation. The Idaho case became a powerful example of that uncertainty. Another enduring mystery involved victim selection. Why this house? Why these victims? Were they specifically targeted, or was something else driving the events investigators described? Various theories circulated publicly, but many questions remained unresolved or subject to ongoing legal proceedings.
The uncertainty became part of what kept public attention focused on the case. People naturally seek explanations. When answers are incomplete, curiosity grows. The story also highlighted the changing nature of modern investigations. Digital evidence played a major role. Surveillance cameras captured movements. Cell phones generated location data. Online activity became part of the investigative landscape. Unlike criminal investigations from previous decades, modern cases often leave extensive digital footprints. Yet even with advanced technology, certainty can remain difficult to achieve. Evidence must still be interpreted, timelines must still be reconstructed, questions must still be answered, and sometimes even enormous amounts of data leave important gaps. Throughout the investigation, media coverage remained intense. National networks followed developments closely, podcasts analyzed every update, social media discussions continued around the clock. The case became a cultural phenomenon extending far beyond Idaho. This widespread attention created both opportunities and challenges. Public interest helped keep focus on the victims and the investigation. At the same time, misinformation frequently spread online. Rumors often moved faster than verified facts. Investigators repeatedly urged caution regarding speculation. The gap between public curiosity and available information became one of the defining features of the case. Years later, that dynamic remains part of the story.
The murders at 1122 King Road were not simply a criminal investigation. They became a reflection of how modern society processes tragedy. Every development was examined. Every document was analyzed. Every uncertainty became a topic of debate. Yet underneath all the analysis, the core mystery remained deeply human. How could a seemingly ordinary weekend end in such devastation? How could a house filled with students become the scene of a crime that would capture international attention? And could the full truth ever be completely known. As legal proceedings continued, investigators, attorneys, journalists, and observers all examined the same collection of facts through different lenses. Evidence pointed toward conclusions. Challenges questioned interpretations. The judicial system moved forward step by step. But the search for understanding extended beyond the courtroom. Because facts can explain events, they do not always explain why those events happened. The story of the Idaho murders is therefore more than a timeline. It is a story about uncertainty, about evidence, about grief, about the tension between what is known and what remains unknown. The victims' names remain central because they represent the human cost behind every headline.
The investigation remains significant because it demonstrates the scale of modern law enforcement efforts. And the continuing public interest reflects something deeper, a desire to make sense of an event that still feels difficult to comprehend. Even after years of investigation, thousands of pages of documents, extensive forensic analysis, and intense public scrutiny, certain questions continue to linger. Questions about motive, questions about victim selection, questions about what happened during crucial moments inside the King Road residence. The legal process may answer some of those questions. It may answer many of them. But until every piece of evidence has been examined and every argument has been tested, the case remains suspended between allegation and final resolution. And at the center of everything remains a mystery that first emerged before sunrise on November 13th, 2022. 4 students lost their lives inside a house near the University of Idaho. An enormous investigation followed. A suspect was identified and charged. Yet one of the most enduring questions remains the same question that emerged in the earliest hours of the case. Why did this happen? And until that question is answered with complete certainty, a crucial piece of the story remains missing.